Good afternoon, or yes, good afternoon. Thank you so much to Barbara and the association for inviting me to talk to you today. My presentation is about the railways of the peninsula, and I apologize, I can't see. Okay, that kind of works, yes. There are 3 railways on the peninsula from about 1892 to 1919, various lines, the Victorian Sydney, the Canadian Northern, which is the Canadian National, and then of course, the Victorian Sydney, and then the Saanich and Interurban line. And there were 3 of them that ran for, I guess, about 50 odd years. And so it's an interesting history. Most of it is on the VNS, but this is basically what I'm going to go into is a basic history of the VNS, the first bit, from its construction to its surveying, all the way down to the final years and the First World War. And it was a big thing back then. And then part 2 will be the interurban line for the BC Electric, the Canadian Northern Patricia line, and then photos and before and after, and then if you have time, some questions. And also, if there's any inaccuracies I have or suggestions, please let me know, because when you're doing research, not everything is correct, and I might get things wrong. So please, I encourage people to tell me, because every day we learn new things every time. So anyway, here we go. So the Corbett Limited was a passenger train for Victorian Sydney. This is a picture of a drawing of my grandfather, the late Gordon Hatch. He actually did the drawing for the book that's from this particular slide. David Lypkie also and George Hearn were the ones that had published back, I think it was the late 60s, early 70s. So that's one of his drawings there. So first suggested in 1879. Now this is a time the era where a lot of railways were being built, kind of like the 50s and 60s, a lot of highways were being built, that kind of a big boom in railway building. So he was an MPP, in this case called MLA. They called him MPP back then. And he proposed that, but it was poo-pooed by the media because they said a railway would never go up the peninsula. There's no way, the population is too small. And they were right. So Henri de Cosmos in 1886 posed a similar idea. And he and a few others proposed to the city of basically a, I guess you could say the city paying for construction. They said no, because that would mean they would have to be with the risks of basically providing money to the organization. And they wanted a 4% interest on $500,000 worth of the first mortgage to construct the railway. Yeah, so basically that's what they tried to do. And then in 1886, Henri de Cosmos, and then they decided, again, they proposed it again in 1892. It was incorporated in 1892, and they had 4 caveats, basically. And the first 2, you can barely see it, I apologize. Basically, the first one was $10 a day for every Oriental that was employed. Back then, it was a huge anti-Chinese sentiment, and Indians have a terrible history of that. I won't go into that. Oh, that's better. So that was that, and plus, like a lot of construction, in this case, there was a lot of, for the fine, $100 if they started before October 1st, and a $100 fine per day if they had started after September 1st, so those 2 years. So they had to do the construction within that period. They did not, unfortunately. And then we have Arthur Bunster and Henri de Cosmos. They look very happy. It's weird. These pictures these days, in those days, they all look very, like, I don't know, unhappy back then. So the contractors and the engineers. So the first one, I apologize too, it's a little cut off there, but the first guy, his name is Thomas Wilson Patterson. And the next guy you see is John Hamilton Gray. So these 2 guys worked on the end as well. Patterson was a contractor, and he did the contract for 50 miles from Shonga Lake to Nanaimo. He also worked on the Victoria streetcar line, the first 5 miles. And Gray, he also worked on the end, surveying the line up to Sayward past Cameron River. It was never built the Cameron River, but he surveyed the line back on the, I guess, the 1880s at that time. And the first president, which is a little cut off there, his name is Peter Dunleavy, and he was a Victorian businessman. So they proposed that. So the first AGM was held on the 1st of September, 1892. And you can't see it, but that's the bond issued to them for 25 years up until 1917. And in this case, the city did say yes because the province would also take the risks as well as the city. So they both would share the risks. So they financed it through a New York agency. They had some American backing. A lot of railways, even in Canada, especially the Canadian Pacific Main Line, had a lot of American backing at the time. And they started serving in the summer of 1892, starting at Sydney and working their way south from there. And they started clearing in September of that year as well. So they did a lot of work in those few months. So construction, it wasn't built to high standards. It was economy, not quality. So, but they had three guys that put their proposals forward, and Thomas Patterson, there he is again. So he proposed it for that amount to build the whole line from Sydney to Victoria. Oops. And basically the embankments, the bridges weren't exactly to specs, but I guess at the time they wanted to build it and start running it, and they won't worry too much about that. So at that time, a lot of rails came from England. So in this case, the Raft Down, which is a British ship, they came down. And there's a certain area too, Elk Lake, Beaver Lake. So they originally had, I have a map up on this here, but basically they had it going across Beaver Lake. When the city found out, because at the time that was their main source of water, so they decided to realign it. So they had to fire or lay off all the workers doing work in the north of the power line, go through there and re-survey around it. And actually that alignment is now the path, the trail we know today, the walking path. So the roster was 2 locomotives, number 1 and 2, 18 flat cars, there was some hand cars, velocipedes, and there was some box cars. I didn't see anything about passenger cars, so I'm assuming they leased them. They didn't really say in the book. But basically that was that. And they basically built it to the Tommy Avenue. There was the bricklayers group that decided to, where's my water here? They didn't want it constructed to their lands, and they wanted compensation. So they asked for $780 for compensation, which nowadays seems like a lot of money, but back then they wanted it. So they had to build 2 large trestles, currently where Mayfair Mall is now. And then they had to wait another few months to put the actual terminus. So Tommy Avenue was the temporary terminus, and then after all this was going on, they built the final terminus at Hillside and Blanchard approximately. I have a map to show you as we go along here. So the temporary run was on May 12th. The official one was on June 1st, 1894. So from Tommy forward, and then the following winter they opened the station at Victoria at Hillside Avenue. And then, so it's cut off again. So basically, the final toll for this was $315,000. So obviously about more expensive than what they had initially proposed, but that happens with construction. There's some things you can't control. And the former handover to the BNS was on 1895, April the 1st, basically April Fool's Day. Now, the Sydney Mill was their major customer, and that was first incorporated in 1892 of June 2nd, and construction started on September 20th, 1892. Again, it's a little cut off here, but if you can't see it, if I move this over here, if I can just, oh, I can sort of see it. That shaded area was donated to them by the Breathler family. They owned a lot of land there, and a lot of the land in Sydney was owned by them, so they donated it. You can't quite see it, but if you can see this little area here, oops. Just look here. My apologies. Right there. So that's, and the mill was right. The mill was right there. So just on the top right-hand corner there. And there's a picture of the mill at the time it was being used. It was shut down a lot, and the biggest time was between September of 1913 to April 1917. And it was a lot of owners, economic issues. A lot of them didn't know how to run a mill, so that's a lot of problems too. So it was shut down a few times, especially during the First World War. It came back online, and it basically shut down in 1934 during the Depression. So it lasted a long time, and then after that, there's basically no evidence that was even there. It's pretty much gone. So there's some various, oh yeah, it's caught up into it. Let's see here. There we go. So it was many of those like sidings through here, like Vera Royal Oak, obviously. A lot of that's gone. Pipeline Road, we just to the upper left there, you see, where the track kind of veers off. Sandishton, Basin Bay. And then on the side here, if you can see it, oh, it's cut off. So if you can see it, there's the Elk Lake, Beaver Lake. They did that reed tour around the other side there. So that's where the path is now. And originally it was going to go across the swamp, and they changed that at the last second. I'm not going to go into great detail of the finances, but it wasn't the best run railway, and there was a lot of things going on. But in the first year, they carried over 15,000 passengers and over 4,500 tons of freight. But they were at a loss of over $4,300. So they were at a loss the first year, and they were at a loss for quite a number of years before they started making a profit. So they had some issues, and this actually will come to haunt them down the road. So again, low traffic levels, high costs, poor track conditions. Again, it wasn't built to standards of, at that time, at least high standards, I guess. There was talk of putting, and eventually did this, there's a talk of putting a ferry connection to the mainland because a lot of the money and the stuff was coming from the mainland, so they decided to build from there, a lot of freight from there. Eventually they did that, and that was led by Thomas Patterson about getting there. And if you can see it, there's one of their many accidents. There's Sydney Station with a steam train, and then there's Sydney Station. That was apparently became a Boy Scouts hall, and then it was set to Colwood, and then apparently it was on fire, and it burned down many, many years ago. And then, so they decided to make their own sort of ferry connection in the Gulf Islands. The Victoria, Sydney, and the Nanaimo Transportation Co. Again, Thomas Patterson built the ship, the Iroquois, to do this. So they served Crofton, its mill, the various islands around there for mail, for passengers, for freight. So it's kind of like their version of BC ferries without the car, because back then the car didn't exist. And so they first started in April of 1900, and the Iroquois sunk once, and then it sunk again in 1911, and it was gone by then. So there's Iroquois there, so that's her there. And then there's little ports of calls there along the Gulf Islands. Many excursions were there. You can see right the little picture there, a lot of kids. And then of course that's the ferry berth just at the north end of the city. That's all gone now, but that had a ferry and then train connections for that. And then to get stuff happening on the mainland, they formed Victoria Terminal Railway and Ferry Company. At first, the city said no to it, but then they passed a vote saying yes. Now, I'm not sure if they actually funded this or not. I'm not sure. It didn't really say. But basically, a lot of the stuff at the VNS was being held by public taxpayers. I suspect that is why it wasn't doing well financially, because why make money when the taxpayer can fund it? So that kind of thing. Interesting note, Thomas Patterson, not only did he run the VNS, he made money for the fuel. So he was actually getting paid by the VNS. He was also getting paid by them to support the fuel. In this case, they used 78 cords of 100 cords of wood, and he made $13,000 in profits during this time, up to 1900. So he was making money from both ends. So some would say it's a conflict of interest right there. Let's see here. At the same time, so they got rails again from England to build the line on the mainland by where it's now ladder now. The Great Northern comes in the picture very soon here. That's a little hard to know when it's cut off here. But basically, Thomas Patterson left in 1902, and it was taken over by other investors and managers. Of interest is this guy named E.V. Boldwell in May 1902. So he bought the VNS and the ferry system, and he was a lawyer for the Great Northern. Interesting enough, he was a lawyer, and then he sold it to the Great Northern after buying it. So he made money twice over there. Then a new station was built at Fiskard. So where Centennial Square is, that's what the station approximately is. That's changed quite a bit in the last few years. And that opened in January 1903 after delaying with the BCER because it had to cross the tracks. And I guess they didn't want to have steam trains interrupting their streetcar line. And at the same time, service to the mainland started on May 7th, 1903. So there was a lot of things going on at that time to have connection to the mainland. And they were trying to negotiate with the Great Northern, and the Great Northern did not want to do more than a 10-year contract. They eventually did for 25 years. And then they wanted to invest in the VNS. They had a lot of promises. And it's a little cut off there, but this is where the station used to be. So Hillside and Blanchard. So Blanchard kind of follows the VNS in that way. So Rose Street is where the VNS went, is now Blanchard Street. Where Topaz is on the north end there's the two trestles, and then there's the freight yard. That's totally changed now that you can't tell right was even there. And then they built a station, again, it's a little cut off, but Fiskard is just to the left. And then eventually they moved the station over to Blanchard Street. Again, it's a little cut off, partly because of the logistics of having a steam train interrupting downtown core. This is going to be, it's a little cut off there. So the Great Northern decides to take over, and this is the time when the Great Northern was competing with the Canadian Pacific, and it was a huge competition between those two. It was big. It was pretty fierce, and in some ways it was pretty violent at times. So again, here we go. There's E.V. Bodwell. He was a firm Bodwell and Duff, and they represented the Great Northern. So after he bought the VNS, he sold it to the Great Northern, and they took over in October the 4th, 1902. I guess one would say there was a lot of conflict of interest in this entire situation. At the time, that was considered normal, I guess. So where Ladner is in the mainland, so that was their connection. It's called Port, I'm not even pronouncing this, but Guchin? I'm not sure. It's gone now, but that's where it used to be by Ladner. And there's the Great Northern Railway tracks on the mainland. A lot of that still exists today. And then that's one of their engines they sent to the peninsula to run freight. So the VNS had, they had some prosperous years, they did. Again, from about 1911 to 1913, they were making money because they had the mainland connections. That's where all the freight was coming in, the passengers, supplies, that kind of thing, through the VT, R, and F, and also the VNS. So they did make some improvements. The Great Northern wanted to extend and connect with the ENN at the time. They also wanted to improve services, supposedly improve the trackage. So they did that, and there was a boom. Let's see here. But even at the time, the automobile was coming in. Obviously, those cars were coming in. There were better roads in the peninsula. And then, of course, opening up the Sandwich Line in 1913. So a lot was going on. So they had a lot of competition at the time that would take money away from them. So they were making money. But then there was a problem. The city noticed they weren't getting what they were paying for. So like poor service, poor trackage. So basically, they were concerned they weren't being paid back their loans, and so they were audited. So in 1903, they had a profit of $403, and then they had a loss of over $4,000 in 1904. And then there was a loss for quite a number of years until 1906, but from 1909 to 11, they actually made over $10,000 in each year. So they were doing well, except the profits were going up and down, up and down. So not exactly consistent with a business. Again, they were funded by the city and the province, so I guess there wasn't much of like a motivation to make a lot of money. Nowadays, they'd be considering that. And then because of this, so in 1913, the VNS paid the city and the province money to compensate them. So the city got $49,000 back, and the province got $33,000 back. It wasn't the full amount they owed, but it was something. So the city and the province, they left. They didn't have to worry about the VNS anymore. So the Great Northern brought in a little gas car. The same gas car was sent to the PGE in later years. So the Pacific Great Eastern had it in BC, now known as the BC Rail, or was BC Rail. So in 1913, they put it in service. They did some other sort of interest going as well. They opened up their own ferry terminal where the Anacortes ferry is now, is where that is, although obviously not the same ferry slip. It's a little different, obviously. But that's where it is, used to be. And then we have the First World War. Now, it was in Europe, so a lot of mills closed down. And then at the same time, the Great Northern paid $45,000 to construct the barge slip. But at the same time, what's happening in Sydney especially, of the 600 residents, 200 of them went to war. So basically a third of the entire population went to war. So you have a loss of manpower. And prior to the First World War, the city, VNS had a a lot of profit, but it dropped from $25,000 from 1913 to negative $25,000 in 1914. So they lost a lot of money. At the same time, they went from almost 124,000 passengers from 1913 down to only 86,000 people in 1914. And that was because of the war, and also I think because of the interurban line that opened up that same year. And then the snowfall of 1916. None of us were alive back then, but I think it was like 8 or 9 feet of snow. So worse than the 96 blizzard. And then there's the snow. This is from Henry Irwitt's book, the Railway Streetcar Era. So I can't see. But below is where the BC Ferries new office is. That's Pandora Street in the background. In front would be Cormont. That's somewhere on the interurban line. I couldn't find anything in the VNS. There were no pictures existing of it, at least in the snow. So you can tell how deep the snow was, even up on the peninsula. And then from about 1915, there's the 3 railways. The Great Northern didn't really start doing anything until 1916, but that's all 3 railways on the peninsula. And then the final years, so being that the VNS had no financial support from the city and from the province, they were having issues, and the Great Northern, noticing that, moved all its equipment away because they didn't want to have the receivers taken over it. So they knew the end was near. They knew it, so they moved out. So again, there's 1913 passenger counts down to 1916. It literally dropped by over half, or in this case, 2/3, and for freight as well. So they were losing a lot of money. So at this time, the province and the city and a lot of businesses asked the Canadian Northern Railway to take over the extension to Sydney for the mill. It took a number of months, but they finally convinced them to do that. And then they finally took over in December of 1917. So this is a picture of Deep Cove. It was known as Deep Bay, or it's weird. It was known as Deep Cove, then went back to Deep Bay during the interurban lines, and went back to Deep Cove. Don't ask why they changed the name 3 times. But it's basically called Deep Cove. And Deep Cove also has the chalet, which is the only, I think, relic of the entire line that still exists to this very day, if it's even an original spot or not. But that's the station at Deep Cove. Again, it's a little cut off, but so the interurban line, at the time, officials of BCR thought this would be a good time to expand into the peninsula. Interesting enough, though, it costs more. So it was supposed to cost $500,000. It eventually cost over $900,000 to construct it, and there weren't a lot of grades. And in fact, it was pretty level off for a railway interurban line, and it was open. It was built to pretty high standards at that time. I got some pictures to show as I go along here. So $110,000 was its main cost, which I'm not sure what it is in 2024 dollars, but it's a few $1,000,000 anyway. It was unique because all 6 interurbans were the only ones in the entire system to have bathrooms. The ones in the mainland did not have bathrooms. These 6 were unique. They actually had a bathroom in here. Interesting enough, the other ones did not. I suspect because by then these were built, they were like brand new high-tech ones, I guess. Let's see here. So, and there are some pictures. So that's Cormont. That building, I believe, still exists now. Where the people are standing is now the new BC Ferries head office. And then this is called line car number 5. It was used to build the line. It was also used to deconstruct the line. So it had the famous sort of thing there. That's Brentwood Bay Station there. Now I think that's where interurban Wallace Drive is now. And that's the Durant's family. So Durant's School is named after the Durant's family, and that's the station right there. That's near Durant's. This is all from the archives and from the books I have as well. So this is up by Durant's, Durant's School or Durant Station. That's Prospect Lake Station. Now you notice these cars are different because a year and a half before it stopped running, they had to, because of the cut and losses, they sent the 6 interurbans to the mainland, and they brought these 2 cars in to take over to stem the tide of losses. That's Wilkinson Road or near it. That's the last spike. And then apparently they did logging. So they actually had log trains on interurban line for a brief moment during its first few years. This is from Henry Irwitt's book. So you can't see it, but they charged basically per mile. And then there's they had like 12 trains a day, and then there's the lines. So again, from his book, showing all the ferry connections. And then down here, you can see it at Sandishton. So that is where Wallace Drive is. That's East Sandwich Road. That's London Crossroads. So this area here is gone. It's old townhomes. This is Wallace Drive, obviously, and this is a farmland. And where this goes, actually, the houses stop. So that's approximately where that is. So again, changing of the guard. So because they were losing money, a year and a half before it shut down, they brought in these two cars, number 22 and 23. They rebuilt them for the service. Unfortunately, it didn't help because obviously the line is gone now. And again, I apologize. When you try to scan pictures and diagrams, it doesn't always work out. But there's Sandwich Station. All the stations had the exact same design. Again, poor freight business. Didn't work because they're trucks now. They were competing with that. Real estate boom didn't happen. So the only really residential areas were Sandwichton, more towards downtown. There wasn't a lot of construction for like residentials up that time. And a lot of things too, they lost money. So you can tell even during, again, it's been cut off, but during the war efforts, they were carrying over 200,000 people a day. So not too shabby for a line going in the middle of nowhere. So, but they were losing money, as you can see, from 10,000 one year to 28,000 for losses. So they were losing money. And the final day was October 31st, 1924. So exactly 100 years this Halloween. So it'd be a good Halloween costume if you want to dress up, funny. And then the CNR, also known as the Lochside Trail now, but I'm sure many of you have cycled it, myself as well. So this is one of their gas cars. So it wasn't just VNS had gas cars. The Canadian Northern, which became the Canadian National, also had gas. And this is up by Sydney, I think by Basin Bay or something like that, or Sandwich Bay? Sandwich Bay, pardon me. And so because of they started serving in 1913, but because of the war, they couldn't do anything because the metal or steel was being used for the war effort. So it wasn't until 1916 they actually laid rail. So 2 years after they surveyed and graded the corridor, they couldn't put anything on there until after the war or during the war when they actually had materials kind of thing. So again, it cost over almost $1.2 million, so a lot more. I think because as the years progressed and labor got more expensive, and of course during the war things cost more, so that's why that cost a lot more than the Sandwich line and obviously VNS. They had, of course, so their service started in 1917, but because of what was happening on the peninsula with competition between the cars and the VNS and also the BC Electric line, they ended service a year and a half later in early 1919. So didn't last too long. So fares were 3 cents one way and 5 cents return. Someone told me in the last presentation I did was because of gas usage. So I guess it may took too much gas going backwards, so they charged more. I'm not sure, could have been. But the line was actually pretty flat, so who knows. So they basically charged per mile one way and not the other. So that's interesting. So as I was saying before, the Canadian Northern took over to Sydney in 1919 in June, and they bought the portion to Sydney in December for over $25,000. But the thing is, it didn't actually, it says 1934 when it was closed down, but actually it lasted to 1990. I didn't even notice, but where Borden Brookendale is now, that was the last customer into January of 1990. So a part of it did last as an industrial spur, and there was also more customers down the line. So it did last, at least that particular part north of Mackenzie was shut down, but it lasted longer than that. And then there's, so this is a mixture of archives and wrote Turner's book as well. I don't think I have, no, it's not here. So there's a picture from his book showing the first steam engine bringing the work trains in April of 1916. 3 chaps on the Blenkinsop trestle. I guess they're just goofing off with their dog. Interesting footnote, that trestle was blown up by dynamite by a farmer in 1954. I suspect it was in his way, maybe. So there's no remnants of that trestle anymore. They did build, obviously what you see now is the pedestrian one. That's new in the 1990s, but that's the old trestle there. You can tell it's going, I think, going north, because I think Mount Tommy's on the right-hand side. And you thought the ANN was bad. So in the 1930s, that's the track of the city. That's how bad it looked. So makes the ANN look much better than you see here. And then there's the ticket for the stations, and then there's the different scheduling for the trains, and then again, there's the gas car that they ran. And there's a final website on the Sandwich Historical site, some more information on the Blenkinsop Bridge. So that was fascinating. And then the corridors today. So this is a fascinating part. So obviously we know Interurban Road, we know Wallace Drive, main raring, that's for the basic interurban line. Interurban Road obviously is the interurban line. The VNS Road, for those who don't know, I'm sure all of you know what it is, but most like VNS, yeah, Victoria City. So I guess they kind of changed the word to look like VNS. So that's up by Keaton Cross Road. And then the Canadian National, which I didn't add, I forgot to do. But anyway, that's Lochside Drive, Lochside. So if you can see this, I had to go CRD maps for this. But basically, you can see it here. So VNS, so interesting enough though, these are from 2023, 2024, and it still shows the right-of-way. I suspect because there were pipes put up there during the VNS time, so it's used as basically the property line. So the property line still shows the corridor. You just know on here. There's the path going up towards this is Pipeline Road. You can see it right here. Pipeline Road, it's just up here. And then what else? And then up here, up to farmland, and of course, up near Wallace. Oh, it's cut off, but it'd be just around here on the opposite side of East Tonge Road. It's pretty fascinating. We can see old corridors here. And of course, interurban line, we have Interurban Road, we have Wallace Drive, main right, Marion right, and then it's again cut off, but Saanich is just up that way. The main airport runway is actually the corridor. So if you're flying the plane, you're flying along the old corridor of the interurban line, going through here. Let's see here. So there's the corridor right there. There's some more here, up to north of that. It's pretty cool. It still exists. And of course, the Canadian Northern Line, there's Lochside Trail, there's Swan Lake. That's Board and Mercantile. Again, there's Mackenzie, Quadra. And there's the corridor right there, Lochside Drive. Lochside Trail along here. And again, some more things with the Canadian National / let's see, where are we here? Yeah, so this is again, the Canadian National, Canadian Northern. The Pat Bay is pretty much destroyed the corridor on the right-hand side. What you see nowadays is just a new path they made. The line's all gone now. But Lochside Drive goes through here. There's areas along here. Kenora Road is named after the ferry that shipped from the peninsula, the Pat Bay ferry. It also served Bank Victoria downtown for the CNR. And that, I think, was demolished, I think was torn apart in the 1970s, but that's named after the ferry there at Kenora Road. And then up here is where the Coast Guard is, and that's approximately where their ferry terminal was. Approximately, I guess. And before and after. So this is VNS Road, approximately where, well, VNS it starts just to the right of the pitch. This is from Google Maps. And then this is before. So this is the station at Royal Oak. So Royal Oak had a station, and later on, I think it was in 1911, they moved it. Oh, sorry, 1908, they moved it to Keaton. Apparently there was a more economical reason to leave it there than, say, Royal Oak. So they moved it. So that is approximately where that is now. So where that, I guess, a little parking lot was where that merchandise store was. And the station was just there. And then VNS is just behind here. These are the bridge abutments at Uptown. They're still there today. Still there, sitting there for the last 100 years or so, just chilling. Of course, I'm sure you know where this is, Fisk Card at Douglas Street. So yeah, so there's the Masonic building, steam train, obviously, streetcar. And then this is First at Bevan. So when I was doing a Google Maps search, stuff like this, you can actually go along the road. If you go along from 2017, it shows this building. But if you go further along in 2019, it disappears. So between 2017 and 2019, so where that van is, just behind it, is a clearing. So this building was torn down at some point in that point of time. So 100 years from that point. So it's gone, but it's now First Street, and that was 100 years ago. So huge changes, and there's the mill in the background. So huge changes since then. You wouldn't recognize it now. The interurban. So the thing we're doing, interpreting aerial maps and old photographs, it's a challenge to find out where things exactly are. And a lot of these pictures, it tells you location, which is great. So this one, Mackenzie is just in the distance there, well, in this thing here. So if you go in the corner, this is Columbine Way, so that road there's Columbine Way. So the dog is about here. There's the curve of the road, the curve of the tracks, and then Mackenzie Way just in the path before those trees are. That's where it was. And then the trestle, there were 3 trestles. So those 3 dips on Interment Road are actually the 3 trestles. So when the line was abandoned, they just basically regraded as a road. And this is up by, it's cut off here.
Third trestle.
Yeah, the 3rd trestle, yeah. I think cut off. I can't see here. Oh, Viaduct Road. So Camosun College is just behind the photograph to the right. And then that trestle, well, the angle is hard to know, but I'd probably be standing about here looking toward the trestle. So somewhere there's the trestle, would have been on that little hump or dip. And then this is Basin Bay. Again, this is total interpretation on my part where this was. So I guessed the curve approximately is where that curve is. There's the park's over there, so that's approximately, and that's from the 1930s when the Canadian Northern was running it, or Canadian National. And there's Blenkinsop Bridge, that's all gone, and then there's the replacement, which is now basically a pedestrian cycling trestle, or bridge, I guess. This is a Jamie Masters photograph from 1989, and that's my photograph in 2024. So not much has changed, except the train's gone. So the track would go along here. So that's Border Mercantile, well, servicing it, so it's on this side of the street. That's my grandfather's photo of the Swan Lake Trestle, and that's mine in 2024. So a lot of vegetation has grown in well, was that 50 odd, 60 years, I guess? There's no photos of it prior to anything involved with steam engines. It can't find, it's almost impossible to find. So this is a little setup I saw at the Pioneering Society. It shows the VNS. This is Mount Newton Crossroad, Prairie Inn. East Sandwich Road is approximately here, give or take. That's old townhomes now. So that just shows about 1900. And then Museum at Sydney. So again, they had this little contraption where you push buttons that shows all 3 sort of lines. There's the mill. There's the interurban, I guess one of the streetcars they use. There's the Iroquois. There's another little setup there too, which shows the VNS somewhere. I think that's Sydney too as well. So it's pretty fascinating. Even though it's gone, it still exists in museums, and there's a lot of gentlemen, people that have made little models to kind of show what it looked like, 100 years ago. I like models. I do modeling myself, so it's for me, it's a fascinating show. You can't bring it back to life, but you can through modeling. And I'm sure you've been to Shaz, which is just Historical Society, and that's my grandfather's building for his streetcars. Now this building here, I didn't really see on the website from Shaz where they got it, but it's one of the last remaining freight / I guess stations for the Interurban line. I don't know if it's actually from the peninsula, but apparently it's the last of its kind that was used. And I must imagine they must have found it at a farmer's field somewhere, but it sits there out there and wouldn't be restored. So that's kind of fascinating. Obviously it would print in red, not gray, I guess, when they first built it. And that's inside. It's cut off, but his interurban model is 1318, formerly 1244, and it ran the interurban on the peninsula. When they transferred the trains to the Vancouver, they renumbered them, obviously, and they put new signs because obviously they were on the Sandwich Peninsula anymore. So he didn't finish it, but this is the smoking section here, and then this. Smoking section, non-smoking section. This is the Sandwich station that my uncle Gordon Jr. built for the display, and he used actual plans. And there's a map of the line there. So, I think my generation wouldn't even go there, but his generation, they built a lot of things by hand. I do too, but nothing to the complete detail of this here itself. And there's my books. I have a home, which I use. So Darren Murrett is his book here, and I got Henry Irwitt's books, and there's Dave Wilkie, George Ern, and then there's another book, it's gone fuzzy. That was made by the Ministry of Railways back in the 1960s. Yes, they had a Ministry of Railways in BC at one point. So that's it.
Very
Any questions?
Sorry. Yes.
The Thomas Patterson that was mentioned.
Yes.
In the different slides, one time Patterson was spelled with one T, one time it's spelled with two T's.
I think it was 2 T's. I just made a slight error when I was doing stuff.
No, that's okay. I just wondered if you knew which one it was.
I think it was 2 T's. Patterson, yeah. I guess when you're doing stuff in a slide, sometimes you miss things beforehand. So.
My family name is Patterson with one T.
Oh,
So I
okay.
was interested.
I think it might have been, let's go back here. I think it was 2 T's, if I remember correctly. Actually, do I have my thing here? Sorry, 1 T, not 2 T's. So that was an error. 1 T, yeah. Yep. Yep. Yep.
Is there any other questions? So Aaron, I think when you and I were talking, did you not say you're still involved with the railways and you're trying to bring them back?
I am. So what's happening now, if you know, the First Nations are having talks with the regional governments. So we can't really do much until it's basically up to the First Nations. So I'm still involved in some capacity, but we can't do a whole lot until we know what's happened with those negotiations. So I've been out for like 32 years involved in this, but now the last year and a half, we've had to wait to see what the results of that are. Again, it depends on December of this year. So I'm still involved in some capacity with transit and rail, but I'm sort of in a wait and see thing right now. But I do help run a local society that's been promoting it called the Vancouver Island Transportation Corridor Coalition for the last 4 years. But yeah, I'm still involved in some way capacity, yeah.
I remember my father saying when he was about 10 years old, he rode the VNS out to Sydney and how it had to stop at Royal Oak. It couldn't get up the hill. People get out of the car, go up to a pub and have a drink while the train is coming up the...
Yeah, the joke was that you could walk faster than the train itself. Yeah, I've heard that was a pretty big, steep, yeah. It's funny because if you go through that area, it doesn't exist until you get the Pipeline Road. Because between Blanchard and Hillside and Pipeline, it doesn't even exist. There's no source of it, so yeah. Yeah. Any comments? No?
Well, I'd like to thank you, Aaron, for sharing this with us. It's always nice to get some information.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.